Because questions,
they have like
feel free to ask some. Versus its own audience of questions.
It's I kind of wish that I could just put like macOS or something on.
Start by asking a very small question. It's just that I didn't really understand what you said before. Why couldn't K like just larger than 0 rather than larger than 1?
It's actually a very technical question. If I fully answer it, there is no simple reason. You're right. If you just want to compare it with future evidence, any positive amount should work.
Yeah.
The actual reason is in some of the formulas, later we're going to introduce, when we calculate the truth value, if the K value take less than 1, there will be some counterintuitive results. It's kind of like you have two ways to derive the same conclusion. You feel that this one should be more confident. You will see the other one get to become more confident, which doesn't make sense. I still don't have a perfect explanation.
So when you say finite future events or observation, you mean increments, like you progress incrementally?
It doesn't have to be incremental. This is more like we are defining some kind of unit for evidence measurement. How to put it? One example, I think, people all know is the story of a child who is lying by saying that there is wolf, right? And you know that story. And there is wolf, and then people run to save him, and see there's no wolf. And then the child lie again. Then usually the story say that in the third time people don't believe anymore. It's kind of like just say if you repeatedly lie. 3 seems to be a threshold. But you can ask why 3? Why not 2 or 4? Why not just 1? Actually, we have that scenario in reality. I can have a more realistic example. Say, for example, if you do some simple test, just yes or no, true, false. Okay, at which point you'll just say that I'm pretty certain that this will happen or this will not happen. Different people actually cut a different position. And that is, I'm not saying this is what personality is about, but it's related to personality, or we have a similar thing in our system design. This kind of parameter, actually, we have a whole bunch of them. The issue is there is no optimum value. Say, for example, this K. What is the right K value? There is no such a thing. We can have 2 models which is identical, but one use K equal to 1, the other one use K equal to 2. Both are self-consistent, but clearly you can see, according to my formula, in one of them, the confidence will grow faster. The other one will grow a little bit slower with the same amount of evidence. Okay, which one is right? Just like in terms of in the context of human decision making, some people say, okay, 3 examples is enough for this thing for me to make a decision. Some people say, no, I will wait a little bit longer.
But I guess for humans, you would have like not all evidence is the same. I guess like for example, this cheating scandal of is Hans Niemann cheating in chess, right? I mean, like if someone just took a video of him like using his phone, then that would be like almost you would just need 1 evidence, and like everyone would be like 100% confident, almost 100% that he's cheating, right?
Yeah.
But like the situation we're now in is that all the tiny amounts of evidence are just so small that you kind of need this like huge collection, I guess. So what I'm saying is that not all evidence is the same.
What I'm talking about is a highly simplified situation.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. In reality, you don't really count 1, 2, 3. Okay, the quality of the evidence matters. That, as you said, very often one piece of evidence is enough for someone to make the decision. I'm making set up a simplified situation. Just say that in this case, and also the first time, second time, third time, usually they're different. And so that maybe the second time is a very strong evidence, the first and third is weak. And here I simplified the situation and say that if we don't have any of those, okay, and we clearly know, according to the intuition behind this definition, this confidence measure should be a monotonical increasing function of amount of evidence. This part, I think everyone agree. Okay, so the more evidence you have, the more confident you should be. Or from an adaptive point of view, the more past experience support a decision, that decision will become more stable and less sensitive to future evidence. For example, very often we just call the new evidence disagree with the previous one as noise. Why can you say this is noise? Okay, just because you're very confident about what things should be, and this is different. So why do we know what that's not caused by a change in the environment? You don't know that. So we intuitively know that this confidence function should be something like this. But the issue is how fast it should increase. Actually, this K value, I'm not the only one. Actually, I'm not the first one who is doing this. And there are several measurements in the history when people study inductive logic. They have something similar. And I think at least 2 people develop similar things, that what they get is not one function as a result. It's a family of functions with a parameter which cannot be decided according to some logical reason. Of course, their formula is different from mine, but there are some similarity here. Just say that for something, later we will see some other situation. There is some parameter which is, you cannot say that it has to be 1 or has to be 2, unless you introduce additional assumption. That's one thing. Another thing is you cannot say it's arbitrary, because it needs to be relatively stable in the same system. For example, some people say, oh, this should be context sensitive. Okay, for now I will use k equal to 1. Maybe for another case, I will use k equal to 3. Of course, you can do that in terms of implementation. But the trouble is you are going to become self-inconsistent. The same amount of knowledge or the same amount of evidence will be counted differently. Okay. Actually, we use some other parameters, values in our own experience. For example, we have some testing which is dealing with a huge amount of given data. Okay. And so the W will very soon become big, so that all the C values of the competing hypotheses, they're all say 0.99 something. Okay, all the difference is in, let's say, in a third or fourth position after the decimal point. Even though logically speaking, there is nothing wrong. But it looks weird and also make engineering practice complicated. And another metaphor I use for this scenario is the unit of currency. In different countries, in some country, the unit of currency is huge. Everyone sounds like a millionaire. If you say that overnight we just divide everything by 100, if we can do it technically, okay, is there any difference? Because it's after all, it's a relative measurement. That's the same thing here. So that K parameter, in one sense, it matters. Yes, in another sense, it doesn't matter because within the same system, if you always use the same K, a stronger hypothesis will always be stronger than the weaker one because the amount of evidence you have is more than the other one. But it looks different. For example, if you take the K value too big, so all the confidence will be relatively small, 0.00 something, because compared to that big chunk, whatever you have doesn't count much, but you can still say which one is strongly supported. That's actually the point of this measurement. That is, you want to compare all the competing hypotheses against the same standard. Here, the standard is future evidence. It's kind of like you're deciding a unit of your measurement. So of course, the unit, in one sense, is a little bit arbitrary, like the currency example I just mentioned. Okay. On the other hand, it's not completely arbitrary because some of them is more natural and convenient than some other choice. So yeah. So it's a messy topic. There are also some other complexity which they may be able to discuss in the future, but for now, you just say, okay, it's something you have to pick a value, but you cannot say which value is the best. But there is a range, too high or too low. Actually, we also talk about use this to describe or to explain, not this number, but this kind of number to explain mental disease. So some parameter, most people will be in this range. If you are here or here, you looks weird and you behave systematically different from other people, even though you can still be self-consistent.
You're gullible.
So yeah, that's a big topic that we can probably.
It's actually a reference.
Huh?
It's almost like a reference.
You can say it's a reference, or you can say that it's a unit of evidence you use to measure everything else.
It's actually, of course, is related to your personality or to a personality of a certain thing, but a system. But at the core, it's a reference where you compare everything to work against because everything is relative. It's not absolute.
Yes, you can see that's clearly the case for this confidence measurement. Okay, compared to the next K, how much you already know. If that K is 1 million, okay, what you already know is a small number.
This really relates to what I wanted to ask about, like your background with where your view on knowledge comes from, that everything is relations. And I think that's really a compelling concept instead of saying that this is a share because it has certain features. It's a share because of the table, because of the ground and everything, or its relations, and also mind relations. So like more the theory behind that, where do you say that comes from?
Again, first, today's, what I have said is a highly simplified situation. So what we are introducing today is basically we're defining a reference point or a unit of truth value measurement. But on the other hand, you don't want to, that's exactly what you said. That's not how you actually collect the information. You collect the information in our system in many different ways, at least in principle. We can get information directly from the sensory motor channel. We can get it from other human. We can get it from other computer system. And what we try to do is to actually combine them in the system and to summarize. Or you can say that I talk about experience. You can say that experience can be further divided into direct experience and indirect experience, which you come from language and from reading and from other people's experience. Okay, so there's some related processing involved. For example, your personal experience count more usually than indirect experience. Other people's story, you don't completely trust them. And also different people, you trust them to different degree for different reasons. And all those kind of things will be taken into consideration. And also even yourself, personal experience, you have multiple channels, you have your vision, you have audio, you have all kinds of things. And in this model, a good thing is we don't completely trust anybody, including ourselves. Okay, and also that's another thing I mentioned, to be able to live with inconsistency actually is an advantage. You see, sometimes we say, I don't even believe my eye. So illusion, all that kind of thing. Why? Because when you integrate this thing together, you have stronger evidence from other parts, which will allow you to make a mistake in any of the channels. You can still make up for that. So I claim this is an advantage, even though many people say, no, that's ridiculous. You even allow your system to be inconsistent.
It's more human-like, because we can say that we are sure, but we are never really sure.
Yeah, and also another answer I have is whether you like it or not is inevitable. That's what the reality, the restriction you live with. Well, sometimes it's good, very often it's bad, but overall, you have to live with it.
Can you briefly comment on or like go through your own personal history of coming up with all of these things, or like from the start of like when you started thinking about these things to the point that you have these like K and whatnot, like how did your own...
It's a long story, but to make it short, I actually, today's lecture is very close to where I started. The whole thing, okay, about 40 years ago when I'm an undergraduate student. I'm interested in AI. The first thing I realized, or everyone realized, is human mind uncertain. Computer and especially math is certain. And people usually say certainty is good, uncertain is bad, is a human bias, or is a human fallacy, or a human, we haven't evolved good enough so that you should get rid of it as much as possible. So I begin to list a whole bunch of uncertainty that we observed in human thinking. And after I studied them, I find that all of them is inevitable. I'm not saying they're good. Just like inconsistency is one of them. Okay, for example, we change our opinion. Well, according to the traditional theory, you should find the truth, then stay with the truth. We will almost never do that. So my first step is to find that there is uncertainty in the human mind. Then the second big conclusion is inevitable. But I'm not saying this is good, and you still need to deal with it. And especially the major conclusion I get is from my graduate student year, for my master thesis. I read a lot about the traditional study about inductive logic. Deductive logic is well established already. Inductive logic is a mess. Many people say that there is no logic at all in induction because induction is using the past experience to predict the future, and you always get or often get it wrong, of course. So if you say you want to do induction, well, that's actually also true for today's machine learning. Okay, as far as you're only talking about the data set you have, of course you can be accurate. As soon as you move beyond that, there is always a danger for you to get it wrong. So if that's the case, and then many people realize that's inevitable, then the next question is, what is the good thing to do, or what is the right thing to do if you cannot avoid mistake? So that lead to what I said today and yesterday, last week. So I say, okay, I see the reality. I completely give up to be absolutely correct. And this is, I think, my personality parameter that is working. And many people realize that's the case. They still don't want to take that step. They say that's too radical, okay? And instead they do what? They withdraw to their comfort zone. They say, we only handle problem for which we know how to handle. For everything else, you should honestly say, you don't know. But to me, intelligence is exactly the ability to deal with the situation which you should know, you don't know, but you have to deal with. Then it leads to the next step is, okay, now I see that's what I suggested today. Truth is not judged against the reality because you don't know the reality. Also is not judged according to future experience. You don't know the future experience. It's judged according to past experience. Because of that, you can be wrong, but you can still say, this one is more likely than the other one, as far as I know.
Does that mean that or maybe in application, practical application, the absolute truth is irrelevant? What is relevant is that how I build this model, how I understand this, how the system understand what is really happening in the reality.
Oh, yeah, since yes, but of course I need to make it a little bit less extreme. Absolute truth, in a certain sense, still exists. For example, you can ask me, how about 1 + 1 = 2, right? Can you say that's true to a degree? Of course, I'm not that ridiculous. So what I'm talking about is more like our daily thinking or empirical reasoning. Mathematical reasoning is a separate thing. You do have absolute truth there. So that in mathematical reasoning, you're really working within an axiomatic system, which does not directly answer empirical question. Okay, and your truth is actually judged not against the world, but against the axioms. So if I can prove it, right, it means what? It means it's logically consistent with my axioms. That's what a true statement is decided. Well, some of them, not all of them. So in our system, in the future, we will mention that we allow the system to use the mathematical logic. I'm not saying mathematical logic is wrong. I'm not saying probability theory is wrong. I'm not saying that model theoretic semantics is wrong. I'm saying that they're misused. They're very often used beyond their valid application domain. For example, probability theory is a perfect mathematical tool, but they assume you already know something to start with, which is relatively stable, on which you can build a relatively stable probability distribution, and so on, which does not need to be modified by your future experience. Okay, if you know that, go with it. In my terminology, actually, you have sufficient knowledge resource already with respect to that problem. You don't need the intelligence. You just need to apply your mathematical model there. So for our system also, in the future, in real application, for some simple problem, relatively stable problem, they will do the same. They will not try to do creative thinking or out of box, that kind of thing. They will just use the available tools. That's the right thing. But the truly intelligent is needed when none of those is available. And you know your data. For example, in recent debate about the machine learning, a lot of things is, for example, the bias of the model they produce. Okay, that's clearly because they're using the model they learned from this data site in somewhere else, where the distribution is very different from the where the model was trained from. So how can you know, or how can you assume you can still use your model there if the distribution is very likely to be different?
Have there been any neurological or neuroscience kind of work, the way DeepMind, for instance, is using systems neuroscience to like derive insights or like compare the algorithms that they come up with neuroscience like evidence? Has there been this kind of work with the kinds of things you're investigating?
Our workforce is not directly related to neuroscience. It's more is closer to psychology.
Okay.
We do have a lot of work on this topic I just mentioned. This so-called human bias. Okay, I have several publications which explains why or how usually taken to be a bias in human actually can be, the same thing can be reproduced in our model. And actually we can justify that, say that is actually the right thing to do. Why? Because you don't, all this research in this school basically assume you should follow probability theory. If you don't, that's your mistake.
In the cognitive bias stuff?
Yeah. Actually, a large part, I think at least you have heard about this concept of irrationality. Okay, so if you say a human behavior is irrational, then what? What is rational? You always compare the human behavior with a certain standard, right? So they're different. So this is rational. You are different from it, so you're irrational. So what's the standard of rationality? Two typical, most common used model. One is classical binary logic, mathematical logic. Second one is probability theory. Okay. Without going into the detail, everyone who learned math, you should know, every mathematical model has its precondition. That's always the case. Okay, even counting has its precondition. Something cannot be counted; it doesn't make sense. Okay, you cannot really count how many a piece of cloud are there on the sky. That doesn't make much sense. Something can be counted, something cannot. This applies to all mathematical theory. So what I'm saying is many of those phenomena actually happen because people are using the mathematical model in a situation where its precondition is not satisfied. So if you use it that way, then your mathematical model actually lost its normative power, meaning that why should I follow you? So some people kind of like intuitively assume mathematical model a universal truth, which is not the case. Even mathematicians acknowledge that's not the case. Every model has its applicable situation. So a lot of discussion here is right there. So instead of trying to find a new neurological evidence, we're mostly using existing psychological evidence to reinterpret that and compare it with the model we have there.
The reason I ask because the system that you're describing is very close to the way that the human mind works. And the human mind, as far as we know, is based on neurons. And so many of the things like the inconsistencies that we have in our beliefs and so on, you might imagine that they're modeled by clusters of neurons that communicate to each other only rarely. And therefore, sometimes you have this belief coming from this cluster of neurons, sometimes you have the other belief coming from the other cluster, if they are physically stored. And also another thing is like a developmental aspect of these things, like how neurons grow or like what areas connect to each other and so on. So these things might actually be helpful in like shaping how like an implementation would look like. So
I will say that agree and disagree.
okay.
The agree part first, okay, say the good thing first. I agree with you that all those phenomena probably have a neurological explanation. So that clearly, since it happens in our mind, of course, there are some neural activities involved. That's surely the case. The disagree part is the thing I touched in last week. I don't think I have to use that evidence to support my theory. I hope I can talk about this without talking about neuron at all, for the reason I mentioned last week, because I still believe intelligence is a phenomenon which can be produced in different places. Even though here, yes, is produced by neuron. It doesn't mean you have to do it that way. Especially, I think we have found a way to explain a lot of things without going into the neural level. For example, this cognitive bias. Okay, if we can explain it from a functional point of view, okay, we see, yeah, that humans do this kind of thing. For example, when we collect positive and negative evidence, and both of them matters, and there's some, according to some traditional model, actually only negative evidence matters because they assume you're always testing a universally quantified statement. So one piece of negative evidence will falsify the statement. No matter how many positive evidence you have, will not confirm it because you're talking about the universal phenomenon. So we give it a different answer, say that's not the correct way to talking about human knowledge. Human knowledge is actually not about universally quantified statements. It's about our experience. So if you take that point of view, you will say both positive and negative evidence matters. So that explains something in this literature. And also negative evidence is harder to handle, at least in our model, we can talk about that. That also explains why humans very often recognize positive evidence faster than negative evidence. So you're right that we can go to neural level, say that's how it happens in neural network. But I think we don't have to.
I mean, sure, that's an interesting way of putting it, that you don't need neuroscience to justify your theory. But I mean, this is the second lecture. I have no idea like what's waiting for us, but I would guess that it would be like trying to develop a theory of physics or say elasticity or something like that without knowing about atoms and molecules and their bonds and like the strong and the weak force and so on. So you would know. Okay.
No, I don't take that metaphor. I would rather use the metaphor I used last time, which used many times in AI. Whether an airplane need to be the same as a bird in all the details.
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
If you want to build an airplane, you don't have to study the bird in detail because you're talking about more about the function. So, but on the other hand, if your whole purpose is to study how birds fly, that's a different topic. So to answer your question, if you're talking about physics, actually we are talking about to study how the atoms and the molecules works. So you have to study it. You cannot just say, so again, here is the common topic of relationship between structure and function.
Okay.
Some function come from one specific structure, so you have to understand that structure very well to explain that function. But some other function have multiple implementation. If that's the case, if you restrict yourself too much to one specific structure, that's actually a bad thing for you. So that will be my argument on this matter.
Okay, so just one last point. So so that I completely understand what you're saying. So your fundamental bet is that in order to achieve intelligence or build the kind of intelligent agents that you're interested in, you would be happy with a Bernoulli level of understanding of the equations of intelligence, or like put it that way, as opposed to all the bird and the cells and like DNA and whatnot.
You can put it that way.
Okay.
Even though I will say, yes, we learn a lot from the brain. Yes. I don't believe this is the only way.
Also interesting, we have many different flying machines, but none of them with their wings, right?
That's what I believe until a couple of years ago. I see a YouTube video. Actually, some people build a flying machine. They fly like this. You know, it's actually wonderful. But that's one thing to say that you have to build it that way to fly.
Yeah, correct.
May I ask, I don't know how much time we have, but like the thing that made me think so much about that was also this whole stuff about like being parsimonious and like minimum description length stuff and so on. And I was, as you were speaking, I was thinking that the way neurons grow, or like the way the brain grows, or like biological systems with limited energy grow, this limitation of not being able to do whatever the heck you want is a sort of like built-in natural sort of like limitation or parsimoniousness, and therefore this might actually help like your theory and so on. But if you're happy with your theory, then...
In that sense, I completely agree.
Okay.
As far as we are not talking about one specific mathematical model.
Sure.
Okay. In that case, we need to check what is assumed.
Yeah.
In that model. For example, if a model assumes unlimited resource, I'm not going to take it. Whatever the conclusion is. And that one precondition itself, to me, that means that's a completely different problem. I think we should officially stop here. But anyone want to stay a little bit longer?
Should we also check the chat in case there was
I haven't seen anything on the chat.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We'll stop the.
Yes, the recording.
Is it like yeah, it's an architecture, it's a structure where consciousness appears, and the Mars model is also